So this is a really excellent quality mulberry. This is called Permaculture. It's Morus latifolia. You can see it has a different looking leaf than a lot of mulberries do. It's a little bit more kind of ruffled around the edges. This makes an excellent mulberry. It's got a longer season than most. This is actually a different species of mulberry. This comes from Korea. And mostly what we have here are Morus nigra, Morus rubra, and Morus alba, white mulberry. This is Morus latifolia. We do sell this in our nursery. And this makes a good sized mulberry, very juicy, purple fruit, really good flavor. And so in the permaculture circles, there is a certain myth, a certain belief that seedlings are always superior to grafted trees. I've been working with fruit trees for over 15 years now, very extensively, all over the world. I would tell you, it's time for this myth to end. That is absolutely not true for any reason. Now, seedling trees can be fantastic. After all, every tree that's a grafted name cultivar was a seedling. However, to base your planting on seedlings is extremely risky and usually does not pan out. So for instance, there's a seedling persimmon over here. Look at the fruit. Does that look like what you're going for? Now you see the grafted Luther Burbank tree, Keener back there, had huge fruit, almost the size of a golf ball. It's the same thing with mulberries. I planted seedling mulberries before, and I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. There's a billion mulberry trees there. Most of them are awful. There are some really, really good ones I found, and I named those and I started grafting them in our nursery. But with a seedling, it's just, you're playing a genetic lottery. You have no idea what you're gonna get. And what you get may be great, what you get may be practically inedible or awful tasting. So don't gamble with your planting. If you want to plant some seedlings, that's great. But if you're going to do an orchard, you're going to do a food forest, you're going to do a permaculture planting, you want to focus on 90% grafted trees. Make sure the cultivars are adapted to your region. Make sure you're working with a reputable nursery that's selling good quality stock, knows what they're doing, and plant those grafted trees and take care of them. They'll get good fruit. They're excellent. There's nothing wrong with grafted trees. Do seedling trees live longer? Sometimes, yes. They can be more vigorous sometimes. But what you're going for is quality of production, not longevity. If you have a tree that's a seedling that produces poor quality fruit, it's going to live 100 years longer than a grafted tree. Well, who cares? It's no good. So grafted trees are what you want to go for. This is an ancient technique that's been done for thousands of years. All it involves in is clipping a piece off of a great tree like this Morus latifolia, surgically connecting it to a rootstock of a wild specimen, Morus rubra or Morus alba, and it grows out and turns into this. That's all it is. So this gorgeous tree is a persimmon tree. This cultivar, it's Keener. The fruit has to be very, very ripe before it's edible. You can see the fruit on this cultivar is very big, very nice size. Easy to grow, very few pests or diseases of any kind. High humidity, high rainfall. They can handle it all. They bloom late. And we do offer this one in our nursery. It's an incredible variety. They do ripen late. These are seedless also. A lot of times the wild fruit can be very, very seedy. And persimmons, until they're ripe, are completely awful. But that's like most fruits in general. But when they're dead ripe, very, very sweet, very high in sugar. They can be processed into breads and muffins, jams, wine.
Not seedless.
Oh, there's occasionally a little seed. But on the wild ones, it'll be like loaded up. Now it may be getting pollinated by this one, which is looks like it's a rootstock. So if these aren't pollinated, they're seedless. If they are pollinated by a tree, they will have seeds in them. That's common with a lot of persimmons. It's probably getting pollinated by this one. Now in years past it wasn't.
Right, which that probably
so it was always seedless. So because these are here, it may be getting pollination now. There's a few other ones around it. And this variety, Keener, was developed by Luther Burbank, very, very famous plant breeder, totally amazing person. This is like your typical American persimmon, size and shape, and then this is Keener, so it's a lot more plump, a lot bigger, and I can almost guarantee the taste and texture is going to be better on this than this one. And that's right. So this is Jujube, and this is one of my favorite trees to grow for fruit in this climate. It does pretty well in Kentucky. It really thrives out west, like in New Mexico, California. Certain varieties do actually do well here. And this I believe is Lee, and there's some fruit on it. Here's one just picked. We'll zoom in and show some fruit here. Nice. So these are delicious.
Are these ripe?
These are ripe and ready to eat. Yeah, it's the middle of October. This is when you harvest them, and they're often brown and green. Some varieties turn all brown. Some are half green.
Is this one?
The more chew them, the more you chew them, the more flavor you get. That's so good.
It's like an apple.
Mm-hmm. But it's got a little bit of a date flavor you can taste in there. They have a little pit in the middle that can be planted for more trees. And what I like about Jujube is they have almost no pests, no diseases, nothing really bothers them. They can take extreme heat, extreme drought, extreme cold, still produce great fruit. They bloom late. Some varieties do have little thorns. This one doesn't look like it really has thorns. That's really nice. Some of the trees can be rather thorny. There's many species of this growing all over the world. There's, when I went to India, they had these on the street for sale. Some of them are, the size of eggs. Some are the size of marbles. They vary a lot. Lee does really well in this climate. Redlands number 4 is an excellent one. Jen is an excellent one. Sugarcane, honey jar, those are all good cultivars for this climate. So gotta check out Jujube. It's one of the best trees you can grow here, and the fruit will really grow on you. It's considered a medicinal tonic in Chinese medicine, so it's to be really good for a lot of different organ systems and giving vitality and long life to the body. Are there any questions about Jujube?
Lang is not a good variety?
Lang is a good variety, but Lang is more for dehydrating. So when you eat it fresh, it may be a little on the spongy, bland side, but dehydrated Jujubes are really good, and they call these Chinese red dates in the Asian grocery stores, so you can buy these bags, call them Chinese red dates. They're not related to dates. They do taste a little bit like dates, but that's how you can find them. If you're interested in trying some, can't find them locally, you can buy them dehydrated and they're really good. And you can grow your own and dehydrate your own. So this is the part of the tree that's the actual Jujube that was grafted, and the rest of this is all suckers that have gotten way, way overgrown. So let's see. This versus this.
Wow. That one looks like it would be fully ripe.
So this is the grafted tree. This is the rootstock to be like. You see, it's very small, and the flesh inside is kind of spongy, not very good. You do get a lot of seeds out of this, so you could use this for seed starting. Richard was asking, are there any needs to prune this tree? You want to keep the suckers off, and you may want to keep the branches trimmed to, once again, about 2 or 3 feet up, just so they're not growing out from the base of the tree. And make sure to keep those suckers off. And anything that's crisscrossing or rubbing, you can clear that out. Or if there's a branch growing in a direction that you don't want it to be growing in. But they don't really need any specific training or pruning or anything like that. They're pretty easy to grow. and they grow pretty rapidly once they're established. And jujubes can handle alkaline soil, acid soil, gravel, sand, clay. They'll grow in just about any conditions. And they're hardy to about zone 5. Once it gets colder than that, they just can't take it. And this is, these are, I believe it's Sisyphus Jujube, but there's many species out there, so you want to make sure you're getting the correct species for your area, and that'll be something you'll have to research on your own. But most nurseries in the US, they're selling jujube trees. These are the ones that will grow here in the American US climate of zone 5 to about zone 10. Are jujubes self-fertile? Jujubes are not typically self-fertile. You may get a little bit of fruit on their own, but they do need cross-pollination of different varieties. So any of those varieties mentioned earlier will cross-pollinate each other. And pollinators seem to really like the jujube flowers. They have a lot of nectar. They're really little flowers, but the pollinators seem to really like them, so shouldn't be any issues there.
And is there any value in trying to renovate this tree?
Definitely. You can take a saw and cut all these suckers out, and the grafted portion will then have all the energy. It'll start growing really rapidly, and it'll save this tree. So there's a couple do's and don'ts I've noticed. This is a white mulberry tree. It's really, really healthy, but it hasn't been pruned to keep it a smaller size, so basically nobody ever gets any of the fruit. So if you want to really use like a white mulberry tree such as this for food production, you're going to want to keep it pruned to be able to harvest the fruit. And then over here there's a chestnut tree, a Chinese chestnut, and it has no pollination partner, so it never gets nuts. It just gets blanks on it. So chestnut have to have a pollination partner or they will not get fruit. They'll get the big spiky burrs and they'll be empty. So this tree needs a pollination partner, and the good thing about chestnut is they grow very quick. So if you were to plant another chestnut tree next to this, within 5 years it'd be pollinating this one. Maybe not the whole tree, it would take a little longer, but it would get pollination, start producing nuts. And then here, this tree, this is a purple leaf plum. And I'm gonna push the camera up here. You can see it's got this lovely foliage. That's why it's called purple leaf plum. And that's Prunus cercifera. But what you'll notice is this tree is really, really tall. And so the fruit production is all at the top of the tree and no one ever gets any fruit off of it. And so what is going on here is these trees have been planted a little too close together. You know, the idea with this was for this to be a food forest planting, and it's done its job in a lot of ways, but one of the major things about it is that the spacing was a little too close, I think, on some of these trees. Like you see this hazelnut shrub here is awfully close to this plum tree. And the plum tree is really close to this mulberry here. And this chestnut, which is gonna get huge at the end here, is really close to this mulberry. So they're all kind of crowding each other. And it's forced this tree to grow really tall to get the sunlight. And so the trees are actually competing with one another. And this is something I commonly see in food forest plantings, like this one here. Most of these trees are all edible species. Is that the spacing is a lot of times not planned out as well as it could be. And then the trees are competing for light. And these branches are all going real straight and high like this, where they're gonna be able to get more fruit on them. So that's something you want to avoid. These trees should have more spacing than this. This is probably, it looks like about 12 feet away from that tree. It should probably be more like 15 to 18, so that they're not competing. That's really important. So this is the natural building shelter. This is a totally incredible looking structure here. And on the outside of it are some fig bushes here. And figs will grow in Kentucky and produce. It's all about choosing the right cultivar. LSU purple It's not the best choice in our region. That was developed in Louisiana. Figs require a few considerations, but they're very highly worth considering. They're very productive, the fruit's fantastic, it's healthy, they have practically no problems with disease or insects. The only things I've seen is sometimes when the fruit is ripening, ants like to climb up the tree and get into the fruit, and yellow jackets and bees can sometimes get interested in the fruit. Birds can sometimes peck at them a little bit. That's about it. If you want to keep ants off the trees, you could just clean it to keep like one trunk instead of having multiple trunks, and you could wrap that with duct tape and put Tanglefoot on that. Tanglefoot's a product that's like a really sticky substance, and you never want to put that directly on the bark of the tree. It will damage it. So you wrap the tree with duct tape, you put Tanglefoot on. You have to do that every season. You'll have almost no ant problems if you do that properly. And there's no other way for the ants to access the tree, like through tall weeds or something like that. But figs are excellent. They like a sunny site. They have to have good water drainage. And the south side of a building, similar to this, is really good because the warmth of the building will radiate off and keep the tree green longer, and the heat will help ripen the figs. And you can see it's the middle of October and this tree is still very green, still has fruit on it. And so I mentioned this in another one of my videos, I'll talk about it now. There's a technique you can use to get these almost ripe figs to ripen almost magically. And what you do is you take a little bit of vegetable oil or olive oil, and you can just use your finger, you can use a Q-tip or something, and you dip that in the oil, and then you paint this eye. That's called the eye of the fig, this little circular dot on the bottom. You paint that with oil, and within 3 to 5 days that fig will just turn color and be droopy and ripe. When figs are ripe, they swell up and they droop down, and they come off the tree very easily. Not much latex comes out of it, if any at all. So that technique actually works. I'd heard about that for years, and I thought, I don't know if that really works or not, so I tried it. It does work. And so figs are a great choice. The best varieties in zone 5 or 6, like Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, is going to be Chicago Hardy. Sometimes it's called Hardy Chicago. Chicago Hardy's great. Brown Turkey does really good. And Celeste does quite good, especially in Kentucky. And there's a few other ones out there. Olympian is worth trying out. A little further south, say Tennessee, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, you can go with LSU Purple, LSU Gold, Magnolia, and we're experimenting with Magnolia here. It seems to be doing pretty good. Now the one thing about figs is, except with the variety Chicago Hardy, they do require a little bit of protection from the cold. What we usually do is we'll cut these back to about 3 or 4 feet tall and wrap the tree up from the trunk up with chicken wire, and then stuff that really tightly with fresh straw, and then put a piece of like high quality plastic or tarp over the top and tie it up, and that sheds the water off the straw, keeps the straw dry, and that's like a natural insulation barrier that keeps the extreme cold from killing the trunk of the tree. Because if this plant does get killed all the way down to the ground, as you can see, here's some branches that froze off last year. If it does die back all the way to the ground, what happens is it'll resprout vigorously, but that growth has to be 1 year old before it starts to produce fruit. So the growth that comes out isn't a year old yet, it won't bear fruit. Then it gets frozen down to the ground in the winter, and it's just a repeating cycle, and you'll have a tree or fruit bush, fig bush, that'll never get fruit. So the way you get around that is you plant hardy varieties and you protect them in the wintertime. If you protect them in the wintertime and that growth survives, it's now 1 year old, you take that off around April, middle of March maybe, depending on the weather, after the freezing weather's done. It'll resume growing, and it'll have that 1 year old growth it needs to produce fruit. Now Chicago Hardy is a very hardy variety, and it will produce fruit on growth that comes up that year. Kind of like asparagus or something. It'll shoot branches out of the ground. They'll get 5, 6, 7 feet tall in a season, and they'll have a pretty good yield of figs off of it. So Chicago Hardy is a unique type of fig. There may be some other ones out there, but Chicago Hardy is pretty unique in that it'll fruit on prima cane growth.
Does it die back?
Just comes up. Sometimes in cold climates it will die back. In Kentucky it usually doesn't die back. Some colder places it may die back to the ground, and you can protect it too, and it'll get even more figs if you let the growth resume after the winter. So they'll have like 1 year, 2 year old growth on it. It'll get even more figs.
But all is not lost.
Right, and it gets very good quality figs. Chicago Hardy are big purple figs, very, very good flavor, very productive. So figs are well worth growing. This is an example of a good idea that wasn't exactly followed through properly. This is a hardy kiwi vine, and this is arguta, and these are really an amazing plant. Very disease resistant, very cold hardy, no major pest issues, and they get a kiwi on them. Some's called a kiwi berry. It ranges in size from about a nickel to a quarter, but they have no fuzz, and so you can just eat the whole kiwi. It has an intense kiwi flavor, really, really delicious, very, very productive. They do have to have a male pollinator. The females are the only ones that get fruit. You have to have a male pollinator. One of the challenges with this in the southeast is that these do start growing in the spring really early. So they'll start sprouting vines as soon as the weather gets warm. They often get frosted, so that's one of the challenges with them. They'll resume growing, but a lot of times it diminishes the crop yield for that reason. And these probably don't have a mate, and they certainly don't have a trellis. So this is growing like a big messy bush. This will never get fruit on it, and so this should be trellised. You could hang a couple wires across here, these two posts here, and have that growing across there like that, and that would be really nice. But these do need very careful pruning, training, and a very stout trellis, because these vines get big. They'll get this big around by the time they're full grown, like a grape. So they need something stout to grow on. But these are definitely worth looking into. So this is an example of espalier, and these are apples and pears grown on wires. And this is a technique from Europe. This has mostly been used in cold regions where fruit has trouble ripening. So they would spread the branches out on a south-facing wall where the sunlight would warm the wall and help ripen the fruit. I don't really recommend people try to get into this, because as you can see, this isn't really being maintained very well, and it's just kind of sprouting out like crazy everywhere. This takes a lot of very, very careful pruning by someone who's very knowledgeable about pruning in the espalier style, which is not easy to come by. If you just want a small tree and just plant a dwarf tree, or prune your tree very, very heavily and just let it grow without the constraints of an espalier system. Now, if you live in a cold climate, somewhere like Canada or something, and you're trying to ripen fruit, has trouble ripening there, then you might want to try espalier. Alright, so Richard was asking, what's the deal with fig wasp? Do you need little wasp? So there's something called a capra fig, and that's like a male fig. And for fig cultivars from Mediterranean areas that are grown in California commercially, such as Calamurna, those need a little wasp that will crawl inside the fig and pollinate it. There's been a few viral videos on YouTube lately about, oh my gosh, there's bugs inside figs, this is disgusting. Well, whatever you think about that is one thing, but the figs that we can grow out here do not need wasps to pollinate them. There's no bugs in them, and they do not produce seeds. These are seedless figs. Okay, Richard has a question.
Okay, my question is, when you're making a choice of varieties of fruit trees, you're making a long-term decision. I mean, it can be decades, really. So the scientific evidence of climate change keeps coming in worse and worse, that the climate is changing faster and faster. So how does this knowledge of the way we're destabilizing climate influence your choice of varieties. Do you take that into consideration, that the climate you plant into may well not be the climate that that tree spends a lot of its life in?
That's a very, very good question. So basically he's asking, you know, if the climate's changing, how do you choose a tree based on the current conditions, or are you calculating possible changes? So what I always recommend is you want to grow as many species as possible. So instead of just putting out an orchard and thinking, okay, the typical things, apple, pears, peaches, plums, you want to plant things like figs, mulberries, passion fruit vines, berries of all kinds, pawpaws, persimmons. You want to have a lot of variety. And you generally want to plant things that are considered very, very disease resistant and considered late blooming. Anything that says it's early blooming is probably something you want to start avoiding, because especially in the southeastern US we have these erratic frosts that come where it can frost, you know, the frost can be over by early March, or the middle of April it may decide to throw a little frost in there. And frost will devastate a tree that's in bloom usually, especially like an apple, pear, peaches and plums as well sometimes. So later blooming things are really good, such as figs, pawpaws fairly late blooming, mulberries late blooming, nut trees are late blooming, grapes are late blooming. A lot of things that are blooming late are going to avoid those frosts and choose apples and pears that say they're late blooming, and especially choose ones that say they're highly disease resistant. So with apples, that would be such as Enterprise, Liberty, Stamen Winesap, Arkansas Black, Pristine, Priscilla. There's a lot of disease resistant apples out there. That's what you want to focus on. And so, you know, we can't estimate how climate's going to change 10 years, 20 years from now, but we can say it's going to be more erratic. So you want to have lots of species so that, let's say one year your apples and pears fail, well, your pawpaws and persimmons and figs did great, or one year maybe your apples and pears do great and something else doesn't. So you want to have a lot of variety to sort of buffer the potential changes in climatic events that may happen. If you put all your eggs in one basket, you may find that they all get broken. So you want to have a lot of species, a lot of varieties, and like I said, mix the species up and mix the varieties up. So try, if you have the space, try at least 2, 3, 4 varieties so that you have a testing ground. And whatever works, just keep doing it. And how do you figure out those varieties? Check with your local extension office, although they're not usually always that on par with fruit growing these days. You can check with them, check high quality books, check with other growers, check with nurseries that know what they're doing, especially ones that are in your region. And they can tell you what varieties have been tested and what will be doing well in your area.
Thanks.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming out today, and thank you for watching this video. I know it's long, but hopefully you've learned a lot of good things about fruit trees, and you can subscribe below and get more videos on permaculture, fruit growing, organic gardening, and agriculture. Thanks a lot for watching.